Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Amy Sam. I am the Health Education Project Specialist at the Maxwell and Eleanor Blum Patient Family Learning Center at Mass General Hospital. Today's program is part of our Climate Change and Health series, a special collaboration between the Blum Center, the MGH Center for the Environment and Health, and the MGH Institute of Health Professions Center for Climate Change, Climate Justice, and Health. Please note this session was pre-recorded for educational purposes. So if you're interested in viewing the recording, you may visit the Blum Center website at massgeneral.org/Blum-Center. Okay, so next I'd like to introduce you all to our guest speaker. Joining us today, we have Dr. Barbara Belanger. Barbara is a perioperative nurse and chair of the Perioperative Sustainability Committee. She is also a member of the MGH Center for Environment and Health Outreach, where healthcare waste reduction initiatives across the organization are addressed. Barbara is currently promoting an initiative in Blue Rock Recycling. Her work to promote a nurse-led initiative for recycling received a Clinical Excellence Award at the AORN Global Surgical Conference and Operating Room Manager Conference in 2019. Her doctorate in nursing practice work focused on informing healthcare policy for recycling from a national perspective, which was presented at the 2022 AORN Global Surgical Conference. She has presented her work to promote sustainability in the clinical setting at the MGH Institute of Health Professions and Cambridge Health Alliance. She joins us today to give a talk on the Mass General Food to Energy program. So please join me in welcoming Barbara.
Thank you, Amy. And thank you to everyone who is joining us for this presentation. Food is something that actually affects all of us and helps us all to be healthy. And now I want to talk about food waste and the impact of it on greenhouse gas emissions. Next slide. This is the picture of the impact food waste has on greenhouse gas emissions. The picture over on the left comes from the Environmental Protection Agency. And as you can see, the bags are compostable, the container is biodegradable, and all the food is food waste. And I created the arrow to show you what these products will create with decomposition, which is methane, the gas. That is one of the greenhouse gas emissions that we're all concerned about. And I created a little blurb on the right, little graph of the molecule of methane, which is a carbon molecule with 4 hydrogen molecules. Next slide. The wet and wear of food waste along the supply chain. I want to start off with a definition so that we're all on the same path. Food. What is food waste? It's food that's produced for human consumption. It's discarded as waste in landfill and incineration. And this food waste comes anywhere along the supply chain. Our supply chain for food globally starts off in a farm where it is produced and it uses energy, electricity, water, fertilizers, and there's human labor in there as well to produce all the food that is sent around the world or locally. It then goes to processing for packaging and for making into all of our cereals and processed foods. Then it is transported by cargo or train or wherever. Mostly trucks are the transportation mode, and the impact on climate change from this part of the supply chain comes from the release of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere from fossil fuel gas until we get to electric vehicles. Then preparation and manufacturing of the food, and then it will be stored in the warehouses and retail areas, and then finally to the consumer, where it is eaten at home and at restaurants. Disposal methods for food waste are alternative or traditional. Traditional, as I said, is landfill, and it is incinerator. And alternative options is what I'm going to be talking about today. And I'm going to be particularly talking about an initiative that MGH has been part of for a very long time to promote sustainability from the healthcare perspective with food waste. Next slide. The carbon footprint of food waste. The carbon footprint comes from 2 different sections. As you can see on the left, I have production and transportation and handling of food. This is where the use of fossil fuel impacts climate change and it generates carbon dioxide. It is a significant amount. It is one of the biggest contributors to climate change and greenhouse gas emissions. trapping heat in the environment and adding to our global warming. The other one is the food waste, the actual decomposition of food, the release of methane into the atmosphere. And methane is a very potent greenhouse gas emission. And it is one of the top 4, which includes methane, carbon dioxide, fluorinated gases, and nitrous oxide. They are all very concerning, and they all have a direct impact on global warming through changes in the atmosphere. Next slide. This slide is just talking about many of the events that can actually lead to food waste. It's not just one thing. There's always a lot of events that actually impact how things happen and wasting of food. It can start off with poor agricultural soil, which impacts the quality of food that's produced. This means that much of the soil has been degraded through repetitive use of growing methods or fertilizers or pesticides. And what happens is the nutrients in the soil are lost. And therefore, if there's no nutrients in the soil or minerals, the plants cannot absorb them and then add to the health of whoever is eating that food. We've seen extreme weather events quite around everywhere. California, the dry heat, in many of the other areas, the waters, the rain, and then up here, nor'easter just recently, and all over the world. But these extreme events do actually affect the production of food. The dryness out in California and the low water levels, impact the ability of the food to grow, because there are lemons, there's strawberries, there are raspberries. It's beautiful out there, and lettuce. All of these are compromised and spoil on the vine. And on the other side, with the rain, we all do know that plants do need sun as much as they need water. And when they have too much rain, they wilt and they spoil and they die. This is just talking about how spoilage occurs at that point. With the migration of vendors and rodents from their normal area, looking for a more temperate climate, exposure to damage from insects and rodents has happened, and birds, and there's mold that grows from a lot of the rain, and then bacteria along the supply chain. How many of us have had food that's been recalled because of Listeria, Salmonella, E. coli? All of that is an example of food waste along the supply chain. Equipment malfunction and overordering. These are 2 big issues that the world is dealing with right now. Faulty cold storage and not being able to maintain the integrity of the food. And then therefore you have spoilage. And then overordering and rejection of Blum's produce. How many times have you gone in and you wanted to get as much as you needed in case you needed it, and then it goes into the back of the fridge or wherever, and it's forgotten about, and then it's outdated, or it's moldy, or it's not edible in any shape, way, or form, and it needs to be discarded. And that is food waste as well. That leads into overbuying more than what is needed by consumers, discarding waste. Next slide. So what does this all mean? And my particular interest is to actually show what can be done about it all. 30 to 40% of the food supply in the United States is wasted. This has been monitored for a very long time, and this is quite a significant amount of waste. To give you an example or comparison of that, I have below some estimates. 31% of food volume. That's equivalent to 133 billion pounds of food, or $161 billion worth of food. It's tremendous. A scientific study research by Weber and Matthews in 2008 that I thought was very significant, the outcomes. We all are trying to buy locally to decrease the impact on greenhouse gas emissions. And I do the same thing, and I feel that that is relevant. These authors showed that you can do even more. Substituting less than 1 day's worth of calories from beef and dairy products. That means if you take 1 day and you don't eat any meat or any beef, and you substitute it with chicken, fish, eggs, or plant-based alternatives, you can create a much more significant impact to reduce greenhouse gas emissions than if you bought all of your food from a local source. And the next slide will show you why. Next slide. This is a graph from Our World in Data. That is a scientific journal source. And as you can see, the top line, beef herd, significant increase in contributions to greenhouse gas emissions. They have all the food here, as you can tell, it's way over to the right. And as you can see, it is all along the supply chain as well. And as you can see below, cheese has a high amount. So does dairy herd, which is the milk and dairy. And then if you go down below, you see pork, poultry, and fish and eggs have a much lower level of contribution to the supply chain. Next slide. Massachusetts was one of the first states to actually align with the Environmental Protection Agency to develop initiatives to reduce food waste. Now the EPA, their goal was just to reduce the amount of food waste going to landfills and incinerators by 2030. And Massachusetts created an initiative that was going to divert at least 35% of food waste. And their focus was on businesses and organizations. There were already, as many of you probably know, there already are a lot of composting in many of the cities and towns from residential areas. Massachusetts wanted to focus on the businesses and organizations and try to find ways to make this happen. The data that supported all of this research in terms of looking at food waste and reducing it was 218.9 pounds of food waste was noted per person that is wasted annually. Next slide. These are the criteria that Massachusetts put in place in 2014, that if an organization generated 1 ton or more of organic waste weekly, they needed to put in place some programs and initiatives that would decrease that amount going to waste. And the success of that program led to the changes last November in that businesses that generated a 0.5 ton or more, that's half the amount, would now be required to put in place some programs to reduce the amount of food waste. I will say at the very bottom, I have that. I think this is fascinating that more than 3,500 businesses have participated in this effort as of 2021. As I said, MGH was one of the very first organizations and businesses to start it out. The rationale for instituting this legislation was to divert food waste, and they wanted it to go to composting and then food digestion, which is a new process that's being developed, has been developed, and repurposing through food pantries, feeding to animals, or reusing it in stews if it's possible. Anything, as long as the food is still edible, not just throw it away. And the goals of the impact of this would be cutting waste management costs, potentially saving money on purchasing, and impact food insecurity. And this is one of the impacts that is significant from a health perspective, is the food insecurity that many individuals and families are experiencing across the nation. And I'll go over that a little bit later. Next slide. I want to be talking about the partnership between MGH Food Nutrition Services and Environmental Services with AgriCycle. AgriCycle is an organization, they're based in Maine, and they are the organization that Mass General has worked with to create food diversion. And it's been very successful, and I know other Boston actually participate as well. Next slide. The initiative was implemented in 2014 and again restructured in 2020. It started off with education first. The plan was developed and the team was educated. And the process is there are no waste bins in the Eat Street Cafe at Mass General Hospital. When you go down there and you're walking around looking for a waste basket to throw something in, there are none. The goal is to encourage everyone to put all of their waste on a conveyor belt at the cafe exit. And the Nutrition and Food Services team have been experienced and knowledgeable in sorting this food waste and compostable food containers from waste, from plastic waste or anything that is not compostable. And they have bins at that area where they sort it out, and all the trash will go into one. And then there are bins, these very large bins that all of the compostable and biodegradable waste goes into. It's picked up by AgriCycle, and I believe it's picked up daily, 6 days a week, and then transported. It used to be transported up to Maine, where it was, where the diversionary composting was done on site up there, and it supplied electricity and fertilizer for the surrounding areas. But now it goes to a more local area in Massachusetts where the food digestion takes place, and all of the food that comes from Mass General will go there and create electricity for the surrounding communities. It is a tremendous initiative. Next slide. These are the outcomes that were measured through the environmental services with Latoya Brewster right now. In 2014, it started off in 2014, or 2020, excuse me. They collected 523 tons of food waste in 1 year. And this was diverted to agriculture for food digestion, the process I told you about, where it actually goes through a process and it produces electricity. And the impact of this it has reduced greenhouse gas emissions, and it was the equivalent of 787 barrels of oil. And it powers 50 residential homes in 1 year. And this was something that Mass General was very proud of to be part of, because it's creating something positive and something healthy, and it's a win-win situation. Ms. Brewster has the outcomes from 2014 to 2020, where 2,836 tons of food waste was collected over 6 years. And that offset is equivalent to 10,000 vehicles. But out of it, this is even fascinating, is it has created 71,600 gallons of natural liquid fertilizer and 180 yards of compost for the farm up in Maine. And now all of it going over to the facility in Massachusetts is reducing the amount of carbon going into the atmosphere and reducing the carbon footprint that Mass General has been part of our healthcare sustainability efforts right along. I have two links for anyone interested in researching the AgriCycle website. And then over on the far right is the MGH Food to Energy program in 2021. It was an article written by Ms. Latoya Brewster. It's very fascinating. Next slide. This is an article. This is a graph that I got from EPA to show the progression of food waste and how it is wasted and why we need to make the changes that are trying to be put into place. As you can see, in 1960 to 1985, I guess it is, most of 1980, most of it went to food waste. There was some that was composted and some that was recycled, but most of it was landfill. But as you see, the progression over the years has been that now we have the highest amount of it going to almost 40,000 going to landfill a year. And that is where we really need to make our change. And that's what this food to energy program is trying to do. As you can see, the recycling is in the blue. The recycling is actually, I believe, repurposing, sending it to food pantries or making it into stews or soups, whatever. And then, of course, composting is a very thin line. It's not a very big industry, but it's there. And then other food management, that was unclear. Next slide. The 2014 initiative outcomes from Massachusetts that they were able to measure was that they increased the food waste diversion to to 300,000 tons a year with a savings of 200,000 tons a year going to the being saved from going to landfill. That's huge. That was tremendous. It did create new jobs in terms of helping out putting the diversion in place, and it increased the gross state product by $77 million. However, in spite of all this change, there's still an awful lot of food waste that can be identified in Massachusetts, and they have identified it as 1/5 of the total amount of trash disposed is food waste. So we still have our work ahead of us and areas that we need to make changes. Next slide. The food recovery hierarchy. This is what Mass General Hospital follows in terms of how to reduce waste. We are doing our part with the program, the Food to Energy program, but also reducing the amount of food that is purchased is an area that not only Mass General, but all of individuals and families can actually work to do to try to reduce the amount of food that is wasted and sent to landfill. It could be shared with pantries, community food pantries, or animals for repurposing. And then finally, the last, if you can see at the bottom of the upside down triangle, the areas where that really still impact greenhouse gas emissions, even though it's helpful for an energy perspective, are the industrial uses such as the food digestion process. The food digestion process, I just want to make one little note here, is also a program that individual families within communities also partake in. I only know of one family up in Vermont that has a food digestion program in their backyard, but it is fascinating to me that this is how things start. One person takes on something and then everybody else follows suit. And it's just fascinating and it's great. Composting is on the lower end of the triangle. Many of us still use it because it does help our gardens, and it also helps with the soil, regeneration of the soil agriculture. So that's an area that we still need to consider. That composting is, as I said, is a section of the regenerative agriculture. And then landfill and incineration is a very last resort for where we actually will send anything. Next slide. The impact of food waste on climate change and health. This is an area that I am very interested in terms of how to promote climate change and health. The connection between food waste, as I went over, was showing how we can reduce the amount going to landfill, adding the methane into the atmosphere, but also being more cognizant and aware of what our neighbors need, what other communities need, and helping out in that way. The link between climate change and agriculture and supply chain resiliency. This is what I have seen an awful lot of programs for regenerative agriculture. One of the nurses I worked with joined one out in the western part of the country and has been very happy with it. There's a program here in Charlestown for regenerative agriculture. It's everywhere, and we need to look and we need to support these efforts to improve the health of our planet, which will ultimately improve the health of all of us. Extreme weather events. This is the impact of food waste because of climate change, impacting the extreme weather events that not only are destructive to our lifestyle, but also to the food supply chain in terms of being able to produce the food, because the weather events that are caused by climate change create climate change, and it's a real circle. And food insecurity, this is where I wanted to start off. I wanted to continue here with this. Food insecurity is not just not having food. It's having access to good food and having the money to have access to good food. And this is where I was talking about with the poor soil in terms of creating not so nutritious food that may be the only thing that's available to someone. We can actually do better than that in terms of improving our food production and making the soil a lot better, a lot healthier, and providing more food for our neighbors who don't have the opportunity to get the food that we have. And that is a whole program. That is a whole program that a lot of us are involved in improving. Next slide. These are the references that I used. And as you can see, this slide and the next slide, this one has all the state references in terms of where food waste started and the links to greenhouse gases and climate change. And the next slide. Can I have the next slide, Amy? The next slide will be the one for the federal. Oh, the next one will be for the federal. Here it is, for the federal websites, where I got a lot of my information. And the EPA is big on it, and the Department of Agriculture, in terms of promoting food waste reduction and how to use the food waste reduction as a avenue to promote energy and better soil for our community. I want to thank everyone who took the opportunity to watch this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Barbara. This was extremely helpful. I did have a couple of questions that I'm hoping that you can help address.
Sure.
The slide was very interesting, how beef is the largest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. Any reasons why?
Yes, I was reading that one as well. That one is because of the amount of resources that the beef use, and also the manure from beef. All of those add to the methane that is released into the air. But also, in addition to that, they were talking about the carbon dioxide that's released from all the electricity, energy, and the fuel that is needed to produce beef. And those are the two biggest producers of greenhouse gas emissions: carbon dioxide from the fuel and the methane released from the decomposition of not only the food but the manure. Also, I thought that was a very interesting slide as well, because it divided the meat between the dairy, and the dairy was less than a third, was about a third of what the beef was. And I believe that's because, I don't really know for sure, but I was reading about it, that the dairy, they're maintained just for their milk, and it's a much less rigorous production process is what I'm thinking there. But that was fascinating, wasn't it?
It was. And you had talked about food digestion. Are there any online resources for one to learn more about it?
Yes, that AgriCycle website that I included on one of the slides, that will direct you right to the AgriCycle website, and they have all that information in there. It is just fascinating. It is just fascinating. I did read an article on it, as I said, about a family up in Vermont that had started the program. And as I said, somebody I worked with, their family in Vermont had one as well. It's fascinating. It just starts with one person and then it just grows.
It is. It's amazing.
Yes. So.
And we did have mentioned, you showed a couple of slides with some links. If anyone's interested in the actual web links, because I know there was a couple where you didn't show the actual web addresses, if you'd like to email the Blum Center at pflc@partners.org, and we'd be happy to share those resources with you. All right, so thank you so much, Barbara. Before we end today's session, are there any final thoughts you'd like to share with the audience?
Well, I would like to just talk about a few people who are really been very interested in all of this. Latoya Brewster is in the environmental center. She has been very influential in promoting any of the healthcare sustainability efforts, especially this one, along with Joan Shea from Nutrition and Food Services. And they've been very helpful. There, a physician in Charlestown who had talked to me about the regenerative program that is going on over there. It was a while ago. And Lynn Forsyth, I believe her name is. And that was fascinating. And she is very, very interested in that as an option to promote health, and how promoting health through food can promote health. And also, I really think that it's a total health perspective, not just physical, but how you feel about yourself and things. So I think it's
Absolutely.
a great start, and I'm so glad that Mass General is part of it.
Thank you for showing that slide with the amazing outcomes too. Very impressive.
Yes, yes.
So what can we do at the individual level to help reduce food waste?
Well, as I said, reducing the amount of food you buy that you don't need, sharing with your neighbors and within your community at food pantries to help decrease food insecurity is a big area. But also composting, even though composting is on the lower level of value in terms of the best thing to do for food, if you can't put it into a food digestion program or give it to dogs or whatever, that has been a very influential program for a lot of individuals. When I was in one of my communities, there was a composting company called Black Earth, and they would pick up all the compost for people who didn't have the opportunity to compost in their yards. They would pick it up from you and weekly, and they would take it and compost it there, and then you would have access to some of the compost that they actually created. So it's a circle that I think we're trying to really develop, a circular economy in a lot of things. And this is one of those areas that we're trying to create a circle for everybody to start up in their home and find out that they're actually adding to the value in the world, which is a good thing.
That's great. Thank you so much, Barbara,
Thank you
for
so
taking the
much.
time to give such a wonderful presentation. It was very informative.
Thank you very much.
And as I had mentioned, today's session was pre-recorded. So if you're interested in viewing the recording, you may visit the Blum Center website at massgeneral.org/Blum-Center. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a lovely rest of the day.
Thank you.